This is the story of a boy named Darren who has a funeral today, where his family and his friends are very sad on his death. But at the same time we see in the coffin that Darren is still alive, and not only that, he is having a lot of fun playing video games inside the coffin. He doesn't know anything that outside he is being buried alive in the ground thinking he is dead. But what happened to him? Before we know this story we have to go back some time, where we see that Darren's life is going very well. He is quite popular in his school and has good friends. Also he is very good in studies, due to which his parents are proud of him. Also Darren has a childhood friend, his name is Steve, who is Darren's best friend and also a negative part of his life. One day Darren and Steve go to school, where Steve convinces Darren to bunk the class, from which both go to the roof of the school, where Steve starts smashing the school's light bulbs with a rock and then challenges Darren to do the same. Then the teacher in the class hears the voices of both of them from the ceiling, due to which they are caught and their parents are told about their actions. Now because Darren's parents always considered him to be a good student, so they scold Darren when he comes home, and asks him to break friendship with Steve, because they feel that Steve's company is turning Darren into a bad student like him. Now the next day while going to school, Darren tells Steve that my parents want me to break friendship with you. Steve is saddened to hear this and tells Darren that you can never stand up for yourself, on which an argument starts between them. Then a car passes by them and a man sitting inside throws a poster at them. Then Darren and Steve pick up the poster and start reading, where they find out that there is going to be a circus called the Freak Show tonight in their town. So they both plan to go to the circus at night. We then see Darren is in class reading with this circus poster in his book, that then the teacher comes to him and takes away the poster from him. Here the teacher shows that circus poster to the whole class and warns everyone not to go to see this circus, because this circus shows illegal things. But Darren and Steve don't listen to their teacher and sneak off to see the circus at night. Here we find out that both of them like strange things. For example, Darren is a big fan of spiders while Steve likes vampires, and he always thinks about them. Well, they both reach the circus and buy tickets to see the show, where a dwarf hiding behind a curtain gives them tickets, but this human looked like a creature. Then Steve shows the man his hand, at which the creature bites Steve on his hand and runs away. Well, both ignore this incident and go inside the circus, where the host of the show, Mr. Tall, comes on stage and calls the first artist on stage. This first artist was a wolf man, seeing which everyone gets scared. Then Mr. Tall points the wolf man to a lady sitting in the audience, to which the wolf man approaches the lady and cuts her hands badly. Seeing this, people get even more scared. But after a while, this lady's hands start to get healed again. Everyone is shocked to see this, and that lady goes on stage, where Mr. Tall tells the lady's name is Korma and says that this girl is a member of our show. Then a third actor named Alexander comes on stage, whose body did not have a single rib. After Alexander there comes a girl named Gertha who had strong teeth, with whom she could break anything. After Gertha comes the artist named Ramus who has 2 stomachs, with the help of which he can eat anything. Here Ramus shows off his talent by eating a tricycle, and then he makes it like a piece and spits it out. Then a beautiful lady named Madame Truska comes on stage, and calls Darren on stage, where she asks Darren that I want to make you an assistant to show my magic, to which Darren agrees. But as Madame Truska touches Darren's face, she begins to see Darren's future, in which she sees some pretty horrible things, which makes her very scared and pulls away from Darren. Then suddenly hair starts to grow on Madame Truska's face, which she quickly shaving them off, and returns to her old form. Seeing this magic, the audience gets a lot of fun and starts clapping loudly for it. Madame Truska is so scared after seeing Darren's future that she tells circus leader Larten to stop the show. Why Madame Truska was so afraid of Darren we will find out later. Here Larten does not listen to Madame Truska's repeated words, and starts showing his magic on the stage. Larten brought his companion spider on stage, whose name was Octa. Here Larten starts dancing while playing an instrument, with which Octa also starts dancing. Meanwhile, Steve realizes that Larten is a vampire. Steve actually read about Larten in a book. Steve then tells Darren that Larten is a vampire, and his real name is Var. Meanwhile, Steve and Darren's teachers arrive with the police and start shutting down the show. Both of them go backstage to hide from the teacher, where Darren sees an opportunity and steals Oka from Larten's room, because he liked Octa at first glance. Darren was taking Octa out of the room when he heard Larten's voice, so he quickly hides in room, which happens to be talking to Larten about the vampanzi. Originally, the vampanzi were hybrid vampires who killed people to feed on their blood, whereas Larten is a vampire who only knocks people unconscious and drinks their blood. Meanwhile, Steve arrives and tells Larten that he wants to become a vampire too. Here Steve says he hates his life, because he is alone. Actually, Steve's father left him a long time ago, due to which his mother became an alcoholic. From then on he was forever alone. After Steve's repeated requests, Larten agrees to turn him into a vampire. But first he asks to do Steve's blood test. As Larten puts Steve's blood in his mouth, he realizes that Steve has a lot of evil inside him. That is, if he turned Steve into a vampire, he would be a very bad vampire, will start killing people. That's why Larten forbids him from becoming a vampire. This makes Steve very angry and he leaves by bad-mouthing Larten. Then Larten discovers that his spider Octa is not in the box. That's why he starts looking for Octa. Seeing this, Darren gets quite nervous and runs away from Larten. Darren runs to the road. Meanwhile, a car with 2 people in it comes and grabs Darren. It was the same car from which a man threw a circus poster. Inside this car 2 people named Murloc and Mr. Tinney are shown. As the duo interrogate Darren, it is revealed that they have kidnapped the wrong boy. Originally they were looking for Darren's friend Steve for a purpose. After that, they both drop Darren at his house without telling him anything. The next day, Darren puts Octa in his backpack and takes her to school, where Steve notices Octa and starts playing with her. Then accidentally the cage falls from his hand and Octa starts running away from there. This sees Darren trying to catch Octa, while Steve follows her with the intention of killing her. Octa runs into the hall, seeing which all the students get scared, and start running around. After some time, Octa tries to escape through a window but bites the Steve on the cheek before escaping, which causes Steve to fall to the floor and faint from the spider's venom. Then Darren goes to Larten, and asks him to save Steve's life by telling him everything. Larten initially refuses to help him, but when Darren requests it repeatedly, Larten offers to help him on one condition. He states his condition that Darren has to be his vampire assistant. That means he has to leave his family, friends and his entire social life. Darren only wants to save Steve, so he accepts Larten's condition. After which Larten bites nails into Darren's hand, and mixes vampire blood in his blood, which turns Darren into half vampire. After that, Darren takes Larten to the hospital, where Larten injects an antidote into Steve's body, to which Steve begins to recover. A few days later, we see that Darren, having become half vampire, was enjoying eating raw meat. Similarly, one day he wants to suck his sister's blood, but he somehow controls himself and goes to his room, where he sees Larten. Larten had originally come to warn Darren. He says you should leave your home, because you can be a danger to your family, but Darren didn't want to do that. But then he realizes that he was thinking of drinking his sister's blood a while ago, so he decides to leave his family. Here he was afraid that if he disappeared suddenly, his parents would always worry about him. Darren tells Larten that I have to die for my family, which you will help me with. That night, Larten comes to Darren and throws him down the house, breaking his neck. Larten had killed him in such a way that he appeared to be dead in public. A scene from the present is shown where Darren's funeral is taking place, while Darren was lying alive in the coffin. On the night of funeral, Larten digs up Darren's grave and digs him out, during which Murloc goes there, who was the leader of the Vampanzy. He attacks them, but Larten dodges it and runs off with Darren. Meanwhile, we see Steve, who is very saddened by Darren's death. He was missing Darren so much. Steve only had one friend who left him completely alone, so one day he thinks of committing suicide. Just as Steve is about to jump off the roof, Mr. Tinney arrives, which stops him from committing suicide. Here Tinney tells Steve that I know about your life and your dreams of becoming a vampire. That is why I will give you a chance to become a vampanzy. Here we find out that along with Murloc, Tinney is also a wimp vampanzy. Also, Tinney starts inciting Steve against Darren, that it was your dream to become a vampire, but Darren stole your dream. After learning everything, Steve becomes very angry with Darren, so he accepts Tinney's offer and goes with him. Meanwhile, we see Darren slowly making friends with the other people in the circus. At the same time, he starts training himself while helping others, but he missed his family and Steve a lot, so he starts looking at their photos in his phone. Darren gets emotional after seeing the photos and starts calling Steve. Then Larten goes there and grabs Darren's phone and breaks it, because he didn't want anyone to know Darren's truth. Meanwhile, Mr. Tinney comes there. He was here to talk about Darren. Here we find out that Darren has some special powers from birth. That's why Mr. Tinney wanted to keep Darren with him. When Tinney asks Larten about Darren, then Mr. Tall tells him that he'll think about it. After Tinney leaves, Larten tells Darren not to leave the circus because the vampanzy might be danger for you. Larten then begins training Darren to protect himself. After completing the training, Darren's skills and strength increase. On the other hand, Murloc turns Steve into a vampanzy, which gives Steve evil powers, and he turns into a demon. Steve first hunts down his school teacher and kills him. Meanwhile, Darren is seen very hungry, so Larten takes him to a nearby farm, and knocks a man unconscious and asks Darren to drink his blood. Now, because Darren's heart is so pure, he doesn't drink this man's blood even when he's hungry. They both return to their circus, where a group of vampansies suddenly appear and attack them. And then there is a dangerous fight between the two groups, in which many people lose their lives. In fact, the vampanzy came looking for Darren. Then a vampanzy finds Darren, who was hiding in a room with Rebecca, a circus girl. There is a fight between Vampanzy and Darren. Meanwhile, Larten and Mr. Tall go there with their companions and save Darren from the Vampanzy. After that, all the Vampanzy run away. Shortly thereafter, Darren and Larten discover that Murloc has kidnapped Rebecca. The next morning, Darren goes out alone to find her, because he felt that it was all happening because of him. Meanwhile, Mr. Tinney kidnaps Darren's family to lure him into his trap. Meanwhile, Darren goes home to see his family one more time, but his house was completely empty. Then his eyes go to the poster on the table. on which Tinny wrote that he is waiting for Darren at the circus. Here Larten also decides to fight the vampanzy, and starts collecting his weapons, after which Darren goes to the circus, where he sees Rebecca and his family hanging on the wall. Seeing Steve with vampanzy, Darren realizes that he has become a vampanzy, so he attacks Steve without hesitation. Meanwhile, Larten also arrives and starts fighting with Marlock. Now because Darren didn't drink blood, he becomes very weak, and starts losing from Steve. Rebecca then frees herself and asks Darren to drink her blood, so that Darren can have power again, but Darren refuses to drink her blood. Rebecca then explains to him that nothing will happen to me and I will be fine. Hearing this, Darren starts drinking her blood. Larten, on the other hand, is badly injured but does not give up, and while fighting, he stabs Marlock in the heart, due to which Marlock dies on the spot. Meanwhile, Darren starts fighting Steve after regaining his power. Then Mr. Tinny comes there and stops them from fighting, after which Mr. Tinny uses his special powers to revive Marlock, and turns him into a creature. Mr. Tinny asks the both boys to go with him, to which Darren refuses to go with him, but Steve chooses the path of evil and goes with Mr. Tinny. After the two leave, Larten hypnotizes Darren's family and erases their current memories. That makes them all forget about this incident. In the last scene of the movie, we see Darren return to the circus, seeing which all the members of the circus welcome him, and make him feel like home. With that, this amazing movie ends here. If you like this video, please subscribe our channel.